Hello. Welcome back to Nation Sports. My name is Nathan Simmons. And with me, as always, is Ethan Kwan. We have a lot to discuss this week, specifically the NFL playoffs, which will be starting this weekend. Let's first start off with the Titans versus Chiefs. Kwan, what's your take?
Yeah, so this one is the first matchup of the weekend. I think really this year, the AFC playoff field is quite weak. I would say that there's three deserving playoff teams in New England, Pittsburgh, and Jacksonville. And then the 4, 5, 6 seeds, I think, are very mediocre to average teams. Tennessee Titans this year in the AFC South. The Texans destroyed them the first game with Deshaun Watson. And the second game, it went down to the wire. Tom Savage threw for over 300 yards against this Tennessee defense. I don't think Tennessee is a strong team. Kansas City certainly has its flaws as well. They won a very mediocre AFC West. The defense just this year was not good at all. They ranked 28th overall, 29th against the pass, 25th against the run. So I think it's a battle of two teams, weakness against weakness, right? So Tennessee's offense has been pretty poor this year. Marcus Mariota has taken kind of a step back in his progression. And Kansas City's defense isn't good either. Indiana, I'll take Kansas City just because they're at home. I think they have a better offense. The fact that the Titans' defense is pretty mediocre as well. I see Alex Smith being able to move the ball to Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill down the field, and then Kareem Hunt to have a pretty good game as well in the running game. And Kansas City wins a close one.
Yeah, I'm going Kansas City as well. There's nothing really from the Titans that intrigues me. As you pointed out, Mariota is really taking a step back. And I mean, this offense has just not been very good. I also would say the offensive line has taken a bit of a step back. I mean, DeMarco Murray is also showing his age. And while at least they have a good backup in Derrick Henry that should be taking over next year, I don't think that their running game is really anything to really help take over a game. At least with the Kansas City Chiefs, they do have Kareem Hunt, who, he kind of slowed down as the season progressed, but he still was one of the better running backs this season. Like, neither defense is particularly great. I think at the end of the day, Kansas City's defense has a much less demanding task in terms of going against that Titans offense. I take Kansas City as well. Then move on then to the Falcons versus the Rams. This should be an entertaining matchup. We're going to have the last year's NFC champions facing off against one of the hotter teams in the NFC, in the Rams. One of the great surprises of this year, I would say. What's your take on this one? Who do you think is going to win this one? This should be a close game.
Yeah, I would say this is the matchup of the weekend. If I were to only watch one of the 4 games, I'd watch this one. It's really close. So these are two top 10 offenses in the league this year. I think Atlanta started off the year quite slow. They had a new offensive coordinator, but towards the end of the year, they really picked it up. Top 10 in passing offense, 13th overall in running. Matt Ryan had a pretty decent year, not as good as his MVP year last year, but still one of the top quarterbacks in the league. Julio Jones picked it up toward the end of the year. Devontae Freeman in the running game and a good offensive line. A lot of these players were the same players that went to the Super Bowl a year ago. Defensively for Atlanta, pretty strong year again, top 10 overall. Rushing defense, 12th overall in passing. And I think that's going to be the key for Atlanta to pull the upset on the Rams. LA's defense, I think, towards the end of the year took a bit of a dip. And I think the key for me in this game, I think, is Atlanta running the football and also the playoff experience, right? So this is the first playoff game for a lot of those LA Ram players. And Atlanta's been there, done that. They've been to the Super Bowl. They've made deep playoff runs in years past. And so I think that's going to play a big key in this one. So I'm going to go Atlanta with the upset. What about you?
I feel like I have to take the Rams in this one just because you took the Falcons. I mean, again, like you said, it's going to be a real close game. I think you're really overlooking Aaron Donald on this one. I mean, Aaron Donald just got named the AP All-Pro team, and for good reason. He's arguably the best defensive players in the league this year. And I think there's a good chance that he helps disrupt both that run and pass game from the interior. I will say that I do think the experience that the Falcons do have will play a factor as well. The fact that they do want to avenge what happened in the Super Bowl last year. That being said, I think since they're both so evenly matched up, that's really going to come down to the wire. I also think that it might come down to who can control the ball better. And I think the Rams with Todd Gurley are going to be slightly better at it than even Devontae Freeman and the Falcons. So I'm going to go take the LA Rams on this one. I will say, though, that one that could sway either way in this would be Jared Goff, because, again, he doesn't have the experience that Ryan does. On top of that, the big reason he had such a great amount of success this year is because Todd Gurley was able to really take over the run game and just completely just take over the offense essentially. And so that took off less pressure from him. And so if the Falcons are able to find a way to slow down Gurley, then the spotlight's going to move on to Jared Goff, and I don't think that Jared Goff would be able to handle it. But that being said, I don't think the Atlanta Falcons can slow down Gurley in this matchup. So I'm going to take the LA Rams. So now let's move on to the third game of this action-packed weekend. The Bills, who were able to sneak in through a very exciting sequence of events with the Ravens losing in the last second to the Bengals. And then moving on to play against the Jaguars, who've been one of the sneaky good teams of this season.
I don't think it's going to be close. Buffalo, congratulations to them, snapping their huge long playoff drought. I had a coworker who's a Bills fan who's very excited, but this is a complete mismatch on paper, and I think it's going to be like that on the field. Buffalo Bills, they're missing Shady McCoy. He's questionable with an injury, and if he can't go, I don't really see them having a chance here because Tyrod Taylor is not a quarterback who's going to be able to make plays, especially against this Jacksonville pass defense, which is the best in the NFL this year, with those two outstanding corners in Jalen Ramsey and AJ Boye, and then that pass rush they have up front with Calais Campbell leading the way. So I don't see a way Buffalo can win this game. I see the Jaguars being able to run the ball early and often with Leonard Fournette against a Buffalo rush defense, which is 29th against stopping the run. So I think Jacksonville will be able to move the ball. Blake Bortles has also been red hot lately, and Buffalo is 20th overall against the pass. So I just don't see a strength of this Buffalo team being able to match up well against a Jacksonville team that's really surging toward the end of the year. And to me, looks like a legit shot of making it to the AFC Championship. So I'm going to take Jacksonville.
Yeah, I'm taking Jacksonville as well, although I do want to correct you on one thing. Blake Bortles has actually been, in the past 2 games, not that hot. He's only thrown 0 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. But that being said, that's not really going to matter against a Buffalo Bills team that lucky to have snuck into the playoffs. I mean, at one point this season, they seemed to be out of it to the point that they decided to start Nathan Peterman, their backup quarterback, instead of Tyrod Taylor, and that went horribly. But congrats to the Bills, absolutely, for breaking that playoff drought. I mean, I know under the circumstances, it wasn't necessarily through sheer dominance that they got through, but nonetheless, I mean, being able to watch your team play playoff football is always a great treat. So definitely enjoy it while you have it. But I definitely think this Jacksonville defense is just going to be too much for Tyrod Taylor to handle, especially without LaShawn McCoy. And I mean, I think this offense, even though I did point out that Blake Bortles isn't exactly as on fire, they still have Leonard Fournette, and that should be more than enough to help take over. And finally, let's move on to the last game of the weekend. The New Orleans Saints take on their division rivals in the Carolina Panthers, who have fulfilled their destiny in having a winning season on a odd year. And so they're now going to be playing against the NFC South winners. Who do you think is going to win on this one?
I'm going to take New Orleans at home. This is a matchup, again, strength against strength. New Orleans offense this year is back to where it was when it was contending for Super Bowls year in and year out. And Carolina's defense is top 10, 7th overall, 3rd against the run. And I think that's going to be key for Carolina if they want to pull the upset in New Orleans. They need to stop New Orleans from running the football with Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. That two-headed duo has opened up the offense for Drew Brees and getting the ball to his receivers down the field. It's been a complete offense, which has been missing the last few years when New Orleans really struggled. On the other side of the ball, New Orleans defensively, they are who they are. They're pretty mediocre, middle of the pack. But Carolina's offense is nothing to write home about. So we'll see if Cam Newton can pick it up against a secondary that's susceptible to some big plays at times. It hasn't been his strength this year. They've really needed to run the ball more, be able to move the ball down the field with Jonathan Stewart and Christian McCaffrey. It's a close one. I think it'll probably end up becoming a shootout just because Cam Newton and Drew Brees in the playoffs. But I'll take New Orleans at home.
Yeah, I'm going to take New Orleans at home. I think this is going to be a really close matchup. I think it's real unfortunate that these two have to face each other in the first round, but nonetheless, I think it should make for a fun game. I do think New Orleans' defense is a bit underrated. I mean, you got Cameron Jordan off the edge right there. He also just got named All-Pro. And then Marshawn Lattimore has been phenomenal his rookie season, more than likely going to be named Defensive Rookie of the Year. But then to also top it off, Kenny Vaccaro has been pretty decent this year. This New Orleans run game between Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram are just too hot to handle. And then obviously with Drew Brees, I mean, granted, this isn't the exact same offense that they won the Super Bowl with. This is much more of a run heavy, but even still, the pass game is still phenomenal. Drew Brees has really started to connect with Michael Thomas in a way that he never was really able to with Brandon Cooks. And I would say, as much as I do enjoy this Carolina team, I think it's still struggling defensively. And I'd say that it's still going to come down to who's going to control the ball. And I think far and away the run game of the New Orleans Saints is far and away the best in the league, and is going to be able to control the clock better. So I would say New Orleans Saints take this one.
Yeah, we will see. As we all recall last year, I was absolutely perfect in picking the playoff games in the NFL. So we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah, and you still lost your fantasy league. So
all right, so we move on to the Houston Texans. So they were making some offseason moves this week. So Rick Smith is gone. Not the best circumstances you want. His wife has cancer. He's going to take a year-long absence from the team. He says he's going to return, but probably will not be in a player personnel standpoint. He'll probably return to some cushy VP of operations or some title where he'll be able to sit in the box of owner Bob McNair, but he'll stay away from the personnel as the Texans are looking for a new general manager. So that's very interesting result that a lot of Texans fans wanted, albeit not the circumstances they wanted under. But the search committee is going to be comprised of the owner, Bob McNair, and his son, Cal, as well as head coach Bill O'Brien and team president Jamie Roots. And meanwhile, Bill O'Brien's going to get a contract extension. Not often you get one after you go 4-12, but I think management realized that the team suffered so many injuries this year and they wanted kind of stability at that head coaching position, and they didn't want him to coach under that lame duck status. So Bill O'Brien's back. Again, my thoughts throughout this whole thing has been kind of mixed, but I'm intrigued to see what he can do with quarterback Deshaun Watson for a full season next year. Your thoughts on those two big moves?
Yeah, I mean, again, hearts go out to Rick Smith as his wife fights cancer. I mean, I know we've talked a lot this past season about how we think that Rick Smith should step down, but again, not in this way, but nonetheless, we hope for the best, and the new GM search continues. They definitely need some fresh blood, fresh new ideas. The player personnel department. Kudos to Rick Smith for getting Deshaun Watson. As for the Bill O'Brien extension, again, it's definitely odd to see that someone gets an extension going 4-12 the season prior. But nonetheless, before that season, they did make it to the playoffs. And at the end of the day, Bill O'Brien has been a pretty mediocre coach in my view. I mean, he's supposed to be an offensive specialist, but really the offense kind of struggled under him up until they got Deshaun Watson. Now the defense has really taken a step back, and there's not a lot of positivity in terms of just how much help they need on that side of the ball and how little resources they have right now due to trading away all those picks to get Deshaun Watson in the first place. I still think that this team should be better than it was this year, so long as Deshaun Watson stays healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the fundamental. Is the success on the field due to the players or the coach? Like, is the lack of depth on this team due to the coaching not developing the draft picks and whatever personnel they bring in? Or is it because, I mean, you can only work with what you can work with. And if you just have not good players, you're not going to have a good product no matter how good the coaching is. But I mean, we'll see a different dynamic next year with whoever their general manager is. Also, I mean, there's been rumors throughout his whole tenure how Bill O'Brien and Rick Smith didn't see eye to eye, and there was some conflict behind the scenes. And so this will be resolved, I guess, with Bill O'Brien playing a big role in hiring the next general manager. But also other coaching moves. Special teams coach Larry Izzo fired, secondary coach John Butler fired. Well-deserved for both of those. Special teams has been hideous this year, and the secondary as well. Defensive coordinator Mike Vrabel interviewing for head coaching jobs in Indianapolis and Detroit. I would say good luck to him and good riddance if he gets one of those jobs. I have no idea why you would want to hire a guy whose defense was like 25th ranked in the league this year to be your head coach, but that's Indy and Detroit. They can deal with him. I just have not been impressed with what he's done with his defense this year. And if he finds another job, good luck to him. As far as offseason priorities, again, no first and second round picks due to the Deshaun Watson trade, 2 third-round picks and a compensatory picks end of the third. So they're going to have that to work with in the draft. But they also have a lot of cap room for free agents. They have a lot of veterans that they're probably going to cut. Priorities, offensive line. Again, we've harped on it, but they really need 4 upgrades there. Center Nick Martin looks like he's an NFL starter, but at every other position, they need an upgrade. The secondary we've mentioned all year long. Strong safety play has not been good. And cornerback, they need 1 or 2 there. And then outside linebacker depth as well as defensive line depth. We saw with the injuries this year how as soon as names like Watt and Merciless went down, the backups there were not NFL caliber players. So they're going to need to address that as well.
Let's dive into the Dallas Cowboys. They've had some offseason moves of their own, especially with some coaching changes. There might be some changes on the line, but we'll see. It looks like whoever is in charge of the offensive line might be getting a look among the league for possibly a promotion. We'll see. I mean, definitely well-deserved considering how well this offensive line has been. Although, again, part of that has been just like getting good personnel. According to Cherry Jones, Marinelli and Linehan, both the coordinators here, are going to still stay on. With Linehan, that's kind of questionable in my view still. I mean, Linehan just had some problems with play calling, just some really poor decisions there. And I mean, it doesn't look like he's going to be improving anytime soon. I mean, you can't really teach old dogs new tricks, but we'll hope for the best on that one. Marinelli is staying on. That's pretty good. I mean, Marinelli has always been really good with coaching up lesser personnel. And this year he seemed to be able to help coach up a lot of the younger players here and get them to buy in. So that was great to hear. The special teams coordinator, Rick Bisaccia, is gone to Oakland. And then as well as a wide receiver coach, Derek Dooley, is now going to be the offensive coordinator at Mizzou. I mean, again, he's just going to a college team, so I can't really say if that's a good or a bad thing. Under Derek Dooley, he was able to help Cole Beasley and Des Bryant. And I mean, Terrence Williams, to some extent, he was able to help coach up a bit. But good luck to him. I hope for the best for him. I mean, I just don't know if necessarily he was ready to be an offensive coordinator, but again, this is just going to be on the college level. As for 2 coaches that are just going to be gone, Wade Wilson, who's the QB coach, gone. I mean, I definitely deserves credit for helping scout out Dak Prescott and essentially vouch for him to come to the Cowboys. That was great to see. But after that, it's kind of hard to tell where he was able to really help develop Dak Prescott versus not before that. He was also the QB coach when Tony Romo was here, but again, like looking back on it, Tony Romo was really the big driving force for his own success. The bigger surprise, I'd say, is the secondary coach, Joe Baker, being gone. No, the secondary took a bit of a step back this year, but a lot of that had to do with letting go of personnel. And I would say by the end of the year, it seemed like the rookies that they drafted in the 2017 draft were really catching on and really playing well. So it seems odd to just be letting go of Joe Baker, especially considering how well the secondary actually was able to play once he got his hands on players. But nonetheless, good luck to both of them, and hopefully they aren't out of work for too long. As for the rest of the priorities in the offseason, the Cowboys did get a lot of comp picks, I believe 4 total for the upcoming draft. I mean, referring back to what I said about letting go of personnel, I mean, that's at least one of the upsides with it, is that you get more picks in the draft. What they really need to focus on, though, is depth at linebacker as well as cornerbacks. I would say at least with the cornerbacks, they seem to have some amount of depth. I mean, I know Anthony Brown took a huge step back, but he's at least, for a backup cornerback, he should be good. Orlando Scandrick, a lot's going to depend on whether or not they decide to keep him or not. He's only a $5 million price tag to keep him. But nonetheless, if they do decide to move on, they could go with the all-rookie corners. I mean, Xavier Woods, he was drafted to be a safety, but he was playing pretty well as a slot corner. And then you have Jordan Lewis and Chidobe Awuzie, who actually got his first interception this past game. I mean, and it was also against Nick Foles, who should be starting in the playoffs for the Eagles in place of Carson Wentz. So, I mean, that's at least great to see. I would say the secondary might need one or two more possible cornerbacks that might be able to fill in someone goes down with injury. But linebacker-wise, I mean, you saw what happened with when Sean Lee went down, and it was just this huge hole. And unfortunately, Jalen Smith wasn't able to fill it. And I mean, like, granted, Jalen Smith was able to improve as the year progressed. I'd still say he's not entirely there to be able to step up and fill in for Sean Lee. So, I mean, definitely finding some depth there. And also, I mean, also considering the fact that Anthony Hitchens is going to be a free agent this year, yeah, they might have to draft or like sign some more. I mean, maybe they do re-sign Anthony Hitchens to fill in, because he was playing pretty well towards the end of the year, but definitely they need to make sure that the linebacker position is taken care of. They also need to shore up the depth of the O-line. I mean, Chaz Green and Byron Bell just have not been able to get the job done all that well, although Byron Bell was at least not as bad as Chaz Green. That being said, I mean, do you try drafting early on, or do you try to go out in free agency and try to sign some people to back up deals? Personally, I would say definitely try to go for a free agent, but at the same time too, I mean, especially with Tyron Smith getting hurt a lot, don't be surprised if the Cowboys do decide to go and draft early on an offensive tackle or an offensive lineman or offensive guard. Wide receivers definitely need to take a look at. They weren't exactly very good this past year, which is also why I'm hesitant to say Derek Dooley should necessarily be an offensive coordinator at the Zoo. But I mean, part of that has to do with just they haven't exactly been investing beyond Des Bryant. They haven't exactly invested high stocks on players at the wide receiver position. And not only that, Des Bryant he's really beginning to show his age, unfortunately. I mean, to his credit, like, he still was able to perform at a decent level, but as someone that's being paid that much to be your number one receiver, you'd like to see a lot more. So, I mean, maybe they also decide to draft wide receiver in this upcoming draft. They definitely need to know that they need improvements up and down that. I mean, Ryan Switzer, I mean, I don't know what his role is going forward in the offense beyond possibly filling in here and there. I mean, like, he showed some promise against Philadelphia, but that was against a Philadelphia team that was resting a lot of its defensive starters. I mean, hopefully he can improve going into next year for his sake, as well as for the Cowboys offense. But yeah, I mean, the big thing going forward, big target going forward is going to be DeMarcus Lawrence, who had a career high in terms of sacks, and for much of the year was leading in that category across the NFL. We'll see if what they decide to do, either sign him long-term or franchise tag him. I mean, more than likely, it's probably going to be franchise tag, because again, he has struggled with injuries, and so this is exactly what the franchise tag is made for, is to make sure they're able to keep someone for at least a year and then see whether or not they can hold up for that, and then try to sign him long-term. I mean, he's still really young, so still got a lot of promise. But yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for the Cowboys. Let's move on to the NBA now. The Rockets have been struggling for the past few weeks. Have they been able to turn it around, Quan?
Yeah, they got 2 wins this week, but James Harden's out with a partially torn hamstring, so he's missed the past week. He's probably going to be out 3 more weeks. They're saying maybe after the All-Star break. It's a struggle right now. They did beat the Lakers on New Year's Eve. They were down 16 in mid-third quarter. James Harden had 40, but the defense just was not good as they continue to struggle on that end of the court without Lou Mamute in the lineup. But they rallied. After Harden went down to the injury, Chris Paul scored 15 of his 28 in overtime as the Rockets beat the Lakers. They blew out Orlando on Wednesday night. Clint Capella at 21-8, Chris Paul 13 assists. And the big revelation this week has been Gerald Green. We mentioned last week he was signed off the street. He was signed last week because the Rockets had a lack of depth at the wing position, and boy, has he been good. He scored 27 off the bench in Orlando, and then Thursday night against the Golden State Warriors, he had 29 off the bench, including 8 3-pointers. So I can't believe he was not signed to an NBA team. This is a veteran. Last year, he averaged 5 points a game with the Boston Celtics and helping them be the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. And he was in the Bucks training camp this year, but they cut him, and then he was just sitting at home. And the Rockets have needed him definitely off the bench with his 3-point shooting and his decent defense at times that he plays. Thursday night's game against Golden State was a big test. The Rockets not having Harden and the Warriors not having Kevin Durant. But the Warriors in the fourth quarter, they just turned it up, and the Rockets defensively could not stop Golden State from getting layups and wide open threes and second chance opportunities. And on the other side of the ball, the Rockets offense has really stalled at times. The past few weeks, missing Harden and Paul, I think has hurt. A lot of isolation style basketball, which we haven't seen in the earlier part of this year, where guys are taking contested shots and quick 3-pointers. Live by the 3, die by the 3, and right now they're dying by the 3, and they need Luke Bamute to get back healthy. They need Harden to get back healthy, but their schedule doesn't get any easier. This upcoming week, they're in Detroit tonight, and then they go to Chicago, and then they play Portland, and then at Phoenix.
I mean, it's nice to see them pull out of that nosedive there, but everyone complains about Harden, but then everyone's like, oh no, come back. Once he's out with an injury. And seeing them get Gerald Green, I mean, that was a big pickup. I mean, I was surprised that he was like someone that was without a job when the Rockets picked him up, but he's beginning to prove why everyone was foolish in leaving him at home. I know he hasn't exactly lived up to his draft pedigree before, but if you need offensive scoring off the bench, he's definitely someone that you can count on now. But yeah, let's now move on to the Dallas Mavericks.
Hot Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, exactly. They while the Rockets were losing, the Mavs were winning, as if they switched bodies or something like that. But yeah, on New Year's Eve, they beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, mostly off of Dennis Smith just taking over the game in the final 2 minutes. It was absolutely amazing, the back and forth he was having with Russell Westbrook. I mean, he ended up scoring only 19 points, but basically, I would say about 8 of those points came within the last 2 minutes. He was just trading back the 3-pointers as well as driving it up for a layup to help sort of essentially kind of ice the game there. He also had, I believe, 6 assists. Dennis Smith is really coming into his own, and while Rick Carlisle is known for not trusting his rookies for much of the year, he's already beginning to trust Dennis Smith, which is a huge credit to DSJ. Fortunately, I'd say, in my point of view, I ended up losing the game to Golden State off a last-second 3-pointer to Steph Curry. Dennis Smith, again, scored 14 points and 6 assists. I mean, Dennis Smith has been phenomenal and has really finally come into his own. He's someone that should now be in the conversation for Rookie of the Year, in my opinion, especially as Ben Simmons has really cooled off and as Kyle Kuzma still struggles to get starters minutes. I mean, I think Dennis Smith should really be in the conversation for Rookie of the Year. What about you?
In the conversation, but I think there's just so many good rookies this year. I think it's going to be tough for him to be over a Donovan Mitchell or a Ben Simmons or a Jason Tatum. But he's a shot of making All-NBA rookie first team, which is a pretty good honor in a pretty good rookie class.
For sure. To go over who they have upcoming, they'll be playing at home against New York and Orlando, and then they'll be flying out to Charlotte to play against the Hornets. And so let's now move on to some college football. As I predicted last week, Georgia ended up beating Oklahoma. It was an exciting game, double overtime. Georgia ended up squeaking it out in the end, 54-48. What was your take on this game?
Well, Nick Fromm grew up. That was a big question going into the game, but boy, he really matched Baker Mayfield throw for throw and keeping Georgia in the game. And then defensively, Georgia was able to make enough plays in the overtime to stop Baker Mayfield and that high-flying offense. I also think the running game of Georgia was outstanding. As you mentioned, the 3-headed monster with Sonny Michel and Nick Chubb and DeAndre Swift was shredding the Oklahoma defense on the ground. I think they had over 200 yards rushing against the Oklahoma defense. So, yeah, very impressive showing by the Georgia Bulldogs and upsetting Oklahoma.
Calling it an upset is a bit of an overstatement. I mean, it was such like we said before, it was an evenly matched game, and so or evenly matched teams, and showed it be an evenly matched game, and this one really lived up to it. Unfortunately, I can't really say the same about Clemson versus Alabama in a rematch of the past championship games. Clemson just got destroyed 24-6 by Alabama. Wasn't really ever close this game. What happened?
Well, they listened to our podcast and my prediction that Alabama would win, and that's just what happened. Now, I think Alabama's defense, they just dominated. Kelly Bryant really struggled this game, only went 18 of 36 through 2 interceptions. The Clemson running game, which was so integral to their success this year, only rushed the ball for 64 yards on 1.9 yards per carry, which is not good at all. That's just what you get from a dominant defensive effort from Alabama. And then offensively for the Tide, Jalen Hurts did enough in managing the game. Threw for 2 touchdowns, and then the running game was really balanced. Damian Harris was 77 yards. Hurts on the ground had 40, and then Bo Scarborough had 24 as well. And they controlled the clock. And I mean, this looks like an Alabama team that of years past with that dominant defense and just enough on offense to advance.
Yep, absolutely. And let's go into the national championship game. 2 SEC powerhouses going at it. I'm sure we'll be hearing about that for the next year. We already mentioned Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. I mean, that run game really is something to behold. But also Roquan Smith really has first round talent. Also look out for Lorenzo Carter, who had a big game against Oklahoma. And so we'll see if he can continue that against Alabama. And then on the Alabama side, you have Calvin Ridley, Deron Payne, and Minka Fitzpatrick. That should make for a pretty decent lineup right there. Who do you think is going to win?
Yeah, I'm going to take Bama. I've been rolling on the Tide since the last round, so I'm going to take them to win the national championship. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. We're not going to see 48 points from Georgia. Alabama's defense is a class above, maybe 2 classes above what Oklahoma brought to you. Just the way they dominated the line of scrimmage at times against a very, very good Clemson defensive line. In running the football, they have some playmakers in the secondary. The one thing that Alabama's weakness, which is not as strong as in years past, has been their pass rush at times. And so we saw what Jake Fromm from Georgia did against an Alabama defense. He just dominated them at times with his throws, and they didn't really get too much pressure on him. So I think if Alabama's not able to get pressure with their front four and they have to bring extra blitzers, that could open up some throws for Fromm against the Alabama defense. But again, I think Nick Saban and his crew will have his defense prepared. It's interesting also the head coaching battle here with Kirby Smart, the former defensive coordinator of Nick Saban at Alabama. So whether or not that provides some intel for Georgia. The game is also at home, basically, for Georgia. Granted, Alabama's not that far away, but it's in Atlanta, in the heart of Georgia. So we'll see what the crowd mix is there. In the end, it's going to be close, but I'm just going to roll with the Tide. I think they have a better defense. The Bama's defense will be able to slow down Georgia's rushing attack a little bit, not letting them run for over 200 yards.
Yeah, maybe they do slow him down. But that also being said, I still think his run game is just Avuga is still too strong. I mean, definitely it's going to be going up against a much better defense in Alabama than the one they faced against Oklahoma. I'll go with Uga just to even it out, but also just because I do think rush attack of the University of Georgia is going to be too hot to handle. I think they have enough talent on defense to slow down Jalen Hurts. The other thing too is that this Alabama offense is not as good as the Oklahoma offense that they faced last week. Although, I mean, and Jalen Hurts, I think does get overlooked at times, but I still don't think he's going to be able to put up the same that Baker Mayfield did. So I'm going to go with University of Georgia.
All right, fair enough. We'll see who was the title last year. Of course, last year I picked Clemson correctly in the national championship. We'll see if I'm 2 for 2 in picking these title games on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to get your thoughts on UCF. So Central Florida went a perfect 13-0 this year. They didn't get a shot in the playoff because they play in the American Athletic Conference, but they beat Auburn in their Peach Bowl matchup, and they're going to claim a national championship title. Of course, this isn't college football past, there's been championships claimed legitimately or illegitimately throughout the year. So this isn't anything new, but what are your thoughts on UCF?
I mean, like, definitely first off, congratulations to UCF for the season that they had. I mean, definitely well deserved. That being said, I mean, they did play in the American Athletic Conference, and like, I mean, at the end of the day, they didn't have to face off against the teams that University of Georgia, University of Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma. They didn't have to play against those types of teams, and so I mean, in all fairness, like, yes, they did go undefeated, but I can't say with a straight face that I think that they're going to be better than any of these teams that they faced. Now, granted, they did end up beating an Auburn team that beat both Georgia and Alabama, but even still, that was an Auburn team that's always been very inconsistent and did lose 2 games this year. You know, all I can really say is just congratulations on that, and hopefully next year they get into the playoffs.
Auburn ended up losing 4 games, actually, if you consider the SEC championship and the bowl game. I kind of agreement with you. I don't think they would have gone undefeated if they had played in a Power 5 conference. But I do think that this is why like college basketball, I think, is so much better. I mean, obviously you can't have a 68-team playoff with college football, but there's teams on opening day in college football this year that they know no matter what happens, even if they win all their games, they have no shot at the national championship. And that's rare in any sport, in any league, high school, college, pro level, where you can look on opening day and be like, hey, if we win all our games, we have 0 shot at winning national championship. Like, that's just weird. I don't know how you solve it. I don't know if it's like expansion to the playoff to 8 games, or you just break up the divisions where the non-Power 5 teams kind of get their own championship. But it's something that's really weird and I think needs to be changed.
Yeah, no, I'd be open to that. Yeah, going forward. Yeah, let's move on now to some Horns basketball. They went on the road and beat an Iowa State team 74-70 in overtime. Eric Davis and Dylan Ostakowski both had some great games, and Bamba, as always, got a double-double, got 10 points, 16 rebounds, and he's actually second in the nation in blocks per game. And so going into Big 12 play, I mean, do you think this Texas team has a good shot going forward? Or I mean, you look at this Texas Tech win against Kansas, and you think, why wasn't Texas able to pull it off? And do you think that that's concerning, or just they're still trying to hit their stride?
Well, no. Texas Tech is legit this year. I know I mentioned it a few weeks ago in the podcast, but that win against Kansas did not play an F game. They played a A-B+ game. Texas Tech was just better. So I don't think that's a knock on Kansas at all. I think the Big 12 conference, again, is really deep this year. It's a really good basketball conference. There's 7 to 8 teams that make the tournament every year from this league. So there's going to be no easy wins. And Iowa State, again, they won the Big 12 conference tournament last year. They lost a lot of players. So, you know, they're not as strong as they were last year, but still a really solid win. The offense has really picked up, and we saw how badly they struggled against Michigan, but I don't know if it's the defenses are not as good, but Dylan Ostakowski, a 3-point shooting machine. I think he had 7 3-pointers against Iowa State on the pick and pop, which is crazy. Eric Davis has been knocking in some 3-pointers, and then Bamba has really elevated his game on the paint. They're getting pretty decent guard play as well, which is nice to see. Matt Coleman has had his ups and downs this year, but he's had a pretty good run the last 3 or 4 games at the point guard position. So I think this team will continue to get better as they go into conference season. The competition will continue to get better as they play one of the toughest leagues in the nation. But I think this team has enough talent to be able to maneuver through that and get a NCAA tournament bid.
I think, yeah, absolutely. They should be able to get an NCAA bid. I mean, again, like you said, it's going to be a really deep year. It's going to be very interesting to see how they're able to pull it off. I would like to see this team play a little bit better. I mean, granted, they probably played against, like you said, the Kansas team had an A-B+ game against Texas Tech. We've definitely played against their A to A+ game when we lost to them. But nonetheless, I mean, Kansas might not even be the best team in the Big 12 this year. I mean, Oklahoma behind Trae Young has been phenomenal. This team needs to keep improving on the past the 3-point line. I mean, Dylan Ostakowski, that's been a nice development going forward. I mean, I know he'd been trying to shoot threes before, but now that he's actually making them, it's like, oh, okay, that should be good. And Eric Davis, we know his struggles last year and his struggles kind of to begin the year, but it looks like he's finally finding his role as a 3-point shooter off the bench. They play against Baylor this week, play against TCU, which is a top 25 team, and OK State. Let's now move on to shoutouts. I believe you have some MLS shoutouts that you would like to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So the full schedule was released this past week, so always interesting to see the matchups and when they will happen. First are the Dynamo. They start off the year, again, with a lot of home games like they started last year, with 3 of their first 4 at home, with Atlanta, Vancouver, and New England visiting, and a trip to DC in between. But it evens out. Their end of the year is really brutal. They finished with 3 out of their final 4 on the road, with at Seattle, which won the Western Conference last year, at LAFC, the expansion team, but has signed a lot of international talent. And then they come back home for a game against Seattle, and then decision day at LA Galaxy. So that's a pretty brutal stretch. So the Dynamo, if they need points in their final weeks, that's going to be a tough way to get into the playoffs. The Texas Derby matchups, there's 3 this year, 2 in Houston, 1 in Frisco, July 21st and August 23rd in Houston, and then September 1st in Frisco. So the battle for the El Capitan, the cannon, which the Dynamo have retained for the past 2 years, take place on those dates. FC Dallas schedule notes open with 4 straight at home, kind of rare. So they host RSL, Seattle, Portland, and Colorado. They also have the CONCACAF Champions League against Taro FC if they advance in that. So they've kind of been easy on the schedule at the beginning of the year to allow for FC Dallas to compete in that competition. Mid-season road swing between July 21st and August 29th, only 2 home games in Frisco and 5 on the road. So FC Dallas really in the middle to the latter part of this year, they kind of collapse. And so that continues this year. It's going to be tough because it's a lot of road games. And then 4 out of their final 6 on the road, including decision day at Colorado. So we'll see if FC Dallas can bounce back after a disappointing year last year. And then also shout out a former Dynamo midfielder, Alex, who signed with a South Korean second division team. The team MVP in 2016, he led the team in assists this year. Did lose some playing time to designated player Tomas Martinez towards the end of the year. So there wasn't really a spot for him, and he also got more money in Korea. So happy trails to him. Good luck.
Also, shout out to Dallas Stars. They're past the halfway mark in the season, and they still have a hold of the number 1 wild card. They're 2 points ahead out of playoffs. The Anaheim team, which, I mean, Anaheim, talk about a turnaround. They went from making it all the way to the Western Conference Finals to possibly being on the outside looking in. And they're 3 points behind third place in the Central Division, behind Nashville. They're only 5 points behind St. Louis. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they end up getting a space right off the bat, but they definitely need to keep up their pace of winning. They did completely destroy San Jose on New Year's Eve, 6-0 in their annual New Year's Eve game. So that's nice to see, to say the least. Unfortunately, then they turned around and lost to Columbus 2-1 in a close game, but then they beat New Jersey 4-3. Big news coming out of that one being that looks like Hitchcock is allowing Ben and Sagan to play again together on the same line. And that's helped the offense to some extent. Shout out also to Zach Martin and DeMarcus Lawrence for making it onto the NFL All-Pro second team. The only Cowboys to do so. Did any Texans make the All-Pro team?
DeAndre Hopkins, first team wide receiver, second coming of Andre Johnson, putting up ridiculous numbers with horrific quarterback play. Shout out DeAndre Hopkins.
Absolutely. Also shout out to Bill Snyder, who will coach in 2018 at the age of 78. Kudos to him for putting up for so long. I mean, dang. I mean, he's just one of those people that I guess just loves coaching. And then Carson Palmer's now retiring after 15 seasons. I mean, I remember when I first started following sports, he was the big thing coming out of college. He was the guy, you know, like it's taken him a while. I mean, like he was pretty good in Cincinnati, then was terrible in Oakland, and then Arizona signed him, and he was playing pretty well. It's just injuries really were the thing that derailed his career to some extent. But I mean, like you can't really say it completely derailed him if he was able to play for 15 years. So hats off to him and happy trails.
Shout out to Kevin Durant, who donated $3 million to the University of Texas basketball program. They're going to rename the Denton A. Cooley Pavilion, which is where the UT practices, to the Kevin Durant Texas Basketball Center. So shout out to KD and donating to his alma mater.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to Jordan Spieth for getting engaged. And just like LeBron James, not only is he arguably the best in his sport, but he's also has a receding hairline. So, yeah.
Man, we cover everything on this podcast, including hairlines.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want you guys to visit our website, twoNatesOnSports.com. Also like us on Facebook at @2NatesOnSports. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, where you'll get a notification as soon as we release our new episodes. You can also send us any comments and suggestions to our inbox at twoNatesOnSports@gmail.com. Nathan, talk to you next week.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Talk to you then.